I've been told I have a face for radio many times. This is episode 21 of The Bio on mojonsports.com. And for me personally, this is a highlight because I get to interview the play-by-play voice of the Montreal Expos of my childhood growing up. And my only real connection, and for a lot of baseball fans in Canada, their only real connection to the game, I mean, it was the Expos once a week on CBC, the NBC game of the week. And without much further ado, it's a treat, a thrill, a privilege, and an honor to have Dave Van Horne, play-by-play voice of the Expos for 32 years, join us for this podcast. Dave, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for the invitation, and it's a pleasure talking to you.
Well, let's get going. Dave Van Horne, born in Easton, Pennsylvania. Tell us a little bit about your childhood growing up.
Easton is part of the Lehigh Valley, about 65 miles north of Philadelphia, 72 miles west of New York. I grew up there, was born and raised there, went to high school there, and after high school, I got out of Dodge, and I went to Richmond, Virginia, went to school there, and one thing led to another, and there'd been a posting in the dormitory at Richmond Professional Institute. You would know it as VCU now. And there was a posting in the dormitory. They were looking for a college student to host a top 40 rock and roll Saturday show. And I wasn't interested in that, but several of the people in the department encouraged me to go down, and I went down with 4 or 5 other guys, and I won the audition. And I started working in radio in that regard, really as a disc jockey. One thing led to another, and I got a chance to go out to from Richmond out to Roanoke, and worked in the old line CBS station out there, and got a chance to do high school football and high school basketball. And as soon as I got involved in that, in sports play-by-play, I kind of had the feeling that that's what I wanted to do. So one thing led to another, and I did high school sports for several years there. And all of a sudden, I got a call from Richmond again, from a radio station there. And a fellow by the name of Frank Messer was broadcasting AAA baseball, the Richmond Virginians in Richmond. And he was leaving to go to the big league. His first big league job was with the Baltimore Orioles. He's pretty well known, Frank Messer is, for his years with the Yankees. And anyway, I replaced Frank in Richmond and got my first dose of baseball. And I was 1 month into that season, and I said, this is it. This is what I want to do. Baseball play-by-play. And I absolutely loved doing it. And that was my introduction to baseball and play-by-play.
Who were your influences growing up?
Well, I listened to broadcasters out of Philadelphia, By Som, and Gene Kelly, a fellow by the name of Gene Kelly. The Gene Kelly that was doing Phillies and A's games wasn't a dancer, though. He wasn't the Gene Kelly from Hollywood. He was a broadcaster and a good one. I listened to them a lot. And then in the fall, of course, year after year, I would get Mel Allen doing the Yankee games. So that was really my introduction to listening to Major League Baseball, both Philadelphia and New York.
I read that when you took the job in Richmond, you went there on the premise of doing AAA, and I guess the franchise had moved and there wasn't a franchise coming in until the next year, and you wound up doing American Legion games just by yourself, just getting the reps in, and actually not even knowing the lineups and just making up major leaguers playing that day.
Well, what I did was I sat in a tree way out in down the left field line where I could see the game, but I had no idea who the players were on either team. So I took a couple of newspaper clippings with me, and I wound up having the Braves play the Cardinals, and so they're the names that I used, and I would take the tapes back to the station, and the boss there would critique those, and I'd go back out to the park and do some more baseball play-by-play, and that's really was my introduction into play-by-play of baseball. But I didn't get to do any live games at the AAA level in that first year, 1965.
You know, it's interesting. In today's day and age, because of COVID, a lot of broadcasters have been forced to do the games off of monitors from either the home studio or, wherever. But, and broadcasters will complain about that because you just don't get to see everything. You don't get the feel. You don't get the opportunity to talk to players, coaches, managers, get that extra insight that you love because you didn't have that access. But taking it a step even further, you actually recreated games in the studio off of a ticker, which for me, man, there must have been a whole lot of creativity going on with that.
It was a Western Union ticker. It was hooked up to the press box at the site of the ball game. And the operator there would give us pieces of information. First of all, it would come on a piece of yellow tape. It was on a huge roll, about 1 inch in height, and you would get the lineups for the two teams, and then you wouldn't get anything until first pitch. And you would get the name of the leadoff hitter, and then you would get B1. So the first pitch of the night was ball one. Then you would get S1. Then you would get S2. Then you would get strikeout. And your game was underway. You got little bits and pieces of information. So in the studio where we broadcast the game and had sound effects, we had information on every ballpark, the dimensions of the ballpark. For the most part, we had pictures of the ballpark, but that was it. The rest of it was make the game up as you go along by looking at that Western Union ticker. It was a great education, and it really paid off for me when COVID hit Major League Baseball a couple years ago, and we were doing games from a studio off of television, and we weren't at the site. And so I recalled sitting there thinking a lot of times, okay, how did I handle this when I wasn't at the game and couldn't see the play?
Wow, amazing. You get the Expos job in 1969. And from the research that I found, it was kind of interesting because John McHale, who'd been in Atlanta, had brought up one of his guys from the organization who knew you from Richmond. And 300 applicants, he basically said, hey, forget about going through the 300 and narrowing it down. I got a guy for you, Dave Van Horne.
That's exactly how it worked. Lou Martin, a longtime sports figure in Richmond, Virginia, was taken up to Montreal to help supervise the construction of Jarry Park. During that last winter without baseball in Montreal, they were expanding this little ballpark that was in the corner of a huge civic park known as Jarry Park. So they put this 28,000 seat facility up there, and Lou Martin from Richmond, Virginia, he was the guy that mentioned my name to John McHale. So John said, well, bring me the application, bring me the tapes. Put them on my desk. I'll listen in the morning. One thing led to another. I got a call from Florida, actually. And John said, come on down here. I want to talk to you about this job. He said, I can't promise anything. He said, because I'm going to talk to several people, but if you'd like to interview for the job, come on. So, of course, I beat a path to West Palm Beach, Florida, and sat down and talked to John McHale. When I left Richmond to West Palm Beach and went back to Richmond, I had no idea whether I had the job or not. I felt the interview went okay. And John had made some comments about he liked the tapes that he listened to. So I had a good feeling when I went back, but I didn't hear anything for a while. And so the boss in Richmond at the radio station said, look, you've got the Southern Conference basketball tournament to do. It's coming up on us fast. I need to know whether you're going to be here or not. So I reluctantly called Montreal and got in touch with the right person, and I said, look, I've got to tell my boss here in Richmond something, one way or the other. I'm either staying in Richmond or I'm headed to Montreal. He said, well, neither. He said, you can tell your boss that on April 8th, 1969, you'll be at Shea Stadium in New York to do the Expos Mets game.
That's awesome. Now,
So that's how I learned I had the job.
You're 29 years old, though. I mean, you've done 3 years of AAA or 3 or 4 years. I mean, at that point, do you feel a little intimidated? Do you feel the pressure considering you're at the pinnacle of baseball play-by-play, working in the major leagues, and you're looking across in the other booth, and you might see a Vin Scully or all these other greats or a Harry Carey or whatever. I mean, what was that like as a 29-year-old stepping up to the plate in the big leagues?
It was intimidating. At Shea Stadium, I looked into the broadcast booth, and there was Ralph Kiner, Lindsey Nelson, and Bob Murphy. And that was a little intimidating because, of course, I had followed them years. And every other broadcaster that I could pick up a feed in Richmond and see what was going on at the major league level with the broadcasters. So, yeah, it was a little intimidating. I was very lucky, Rob. And my partner was a Montrealer, Russ Taylor. He had actually covered and done some of the Montreal Royals games. They were one of 3 AAA clubs in the Brooklyn Dodgers system. And everybody probably knows the Montreal Royals more for the fact that that's where Jackie Robinson came from and the big leap into Major League Baseball. But Russ was doing Royals baseball. He was the one that took me to school on Montreal baseball history, the history of baseball across the country in Canada. And even touched on some of the political aspects of being in the province of Quebec and working in Montreal. I was so fortunate to have him as a partner and as a teacher. So I got off to a pretty good start in Montreal.
Well, not only that, but you get off to a great start in terms of highlights, in terms of memorable games. Yeah. Joe Musgrove threw a no-hitter for the Padres in 2021. That was the first no-hitter in Padres history. They'd been in the league since 1969. They came in with the Expos. We're talking 52 years of Padres baseball with no-hitters. You got to see one in the 9th game of the Expos history. Bill Stoneman throws that. I mean, you must have thought he died and gone to heaven. You got this great moment to call 9 games into your career.
And this is what made that an especially exciting night for me. I was doing that game at Jarry Park, Connie Mack Stadium, the old ballpark in Philadelphia. That's the ballpark that I went to as a teenager to see Major League Baseball. So there I am sitting in the broadcast booth there, and Bill Stoneman pitched that the first of his 2 no-hitters that season. So it was a thrilling and exciting night for me, needless to say.
Dave Van Horne is our guest. More with Dave after these messages. Dave, the Jarry Park years. I've talked to so many people that got to watch games there. And it wasn't the greatest facility, but there was something about it, the romanticism of it, whatever it may be. Just what are your memories of the Expos at Jarry Park?
Well, they were terrific because in that very first year, while the team won 52 games and lost 110 as an expansion team. But when the weather warmed up a little bit, they packed that ballpark, and the expansion team drew over 1 million people in that ballpark that sat 28,000. So it was an exciting summer. But I'll say this, I learned very quickly about weather in Quebec and in Montreal. And it was cold, blistery cold at times, spitting rain and sleet and snow at times in April. And then that would all end from early May or mid-May. And then it would return in September. So those 2 months were really wicked at Jarry Park. But by golly, the fans were there. had all their ski clothes on. They'd come out to see a baseball game, had these big, heavy down jackets on, what they call a toque, we call a ski cap, and they would be in gloves, and it really changed the atmosphere of the ballpark. Imagine all the fans in the ballpark clapping, and they had these thick gloves on. So it was a very muffled sound in the early month of baseball there, but it was a great education, and it was the start of, for me, of 32 years in Montreal.
The team moves to Olympic Stadium, and you kind of lose a little bit of that nostalgia, that romanticism, I guess, with Jarry Park. But conversely, the team starts playing much better. I grew up with those teams, and I just remember the disappointment in the sense that they had these great runs, and they'd lose the East to the Pirates, and they'd win the World Series. They'd lose the East to the Phillies, and they'd win the World Series. It seemed like whoever they lost out to, whether it was the NL East competition or maybe even the Dodgers in the playoffs, it was that team would go on and win a World Series. What was that like? Because clearly, as a broadcaster, I mean, it's not to say that you're part of the team and you want you feel like you're part of it, but in a way you are, and you know these people, and you want to see them do well. You want to see the city get excited. I mean, is it bittersweet looking back at those teams, given the sense that they were very good teams, yet at the same time, they never managed to get over that hurdle?
Yes, and they had another terrific run, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But I got to watch them build that farm system, Bob. And they spent the better part of the last year in the 60s, 1969, and then better part of the first decade of the 70s, building a farm system. And that team came to fruition with mostly home drafted and players on that team. They brought a few in from the outside to fill gaps here and there, but it was mostly a homegrown team, and they won 95 games in 1979. The first year they were bona fide contenders for anything, and of course that was the year that you referenced, where the Pirates on the last weekend beat Montreal, and it was the last weekend when the Phillies won the next year. And it was Game 5, which was the final game of the league championship series, when the Dodgers won on infamous Blue Monday, and hit a home run and sent the Dodgers to the World Series. So it was tough. There was a 16-year period from 1974, was it? No, it was in the 80s. There was a 16-year period that ended in 94. You know about what happened in 94. Everything ended in baseball. It was just heartbreaking and just terrible. In that 16-year period, the Montreal Expos won more games than any other National League East Division team, and couldn't advance in the playoff.
I remember talking to Steve Rogers one time. I was lucky enough to have a conversation with him here in Vancouver. And he was of the belief that they needed one more bat. That was his thought. I always kind of thought to myself, if they had another ace pitcher like Steve Rogers, that might have been able to get him over the hump.
I would tend to agree with that. I mean, Steve Rogers, a lot of people that didn't follow the Expos back in the day probably don't know who Steve Rogers is. But if you're a baseball fan, you should find out and go back and look at the Steve Rogers record with the Expos from the time he was called up in the early 70s until the time he was finished in, 84. Steve was magnificent, posted great numbers. And if they'd have had another Steve Rogers, there's no doubt in my mind that some of those teams in 79, 80, the early 80s would have advanced.
1981, Blue Monday. As a play-by-play voice, you have to describe and articulate what you're seeing, yet at the same time. And I see this a lot more with American broadcasters, where and particularly in football, there's a great example here locally where if there's a touchdown, it's like a 10 out of 10 in terms of excitement. If the opposing team scores a touchdown, it sounds like a 1 out of 10 on the excitement scale. There's no balance to it. Yet you kind of always provided that balance, even if it was the opposing team that did well. And of course, Blue Monday, man, oh man, it must have been a tough call to provide that balance, because inside, you got to be like hurting, seeing what's going on.
No question, it was. When the Dodgers scored that run in the top of the 9th inning, that team, that Montreal team, had played so well and put points on the board, put runs up there. And Duke and I were talking during the commercial break and said, they'll win this thing in the bottom of the 9th. They'll do what they need to do to score a couple of runs or more and walk it off somehow, because that's what they've done all season long. And of course, it didn't happen. But we didn't realize at the moment that Monday hit the home run how devastating that would be to the franchise. We really had high hopes that the Expos would come back in the bottom of the inning.
Devastated a country. I mean, I was a kid in high school, and they brought the TV in on the old trolley, and they wheeled it in, plugged it in, and we watched the game. And I remember being in class and watching that Blue Monday home run, and just the gasp in the classroom and the disappointment, because it had captivated an entire country at that point. Moving along, and you look at 1994, you touched on it, the strike year. Was that a bigger disappointment than 81 in Blue Monday? And I say that because in 81, the action got played on the field. The Dodgers beat the Expos. As disappointing as it was, there were no what ifs. Well, there might be, but the game was played. In 1994, it was just, everything was wiped out. I imagine that had to be extremely frustrating from everyone's perspective.
I would say the only what if from 81 would be the fact that Jeff Reardon was not available to come out of the bullpen that day, which is why Expos went to Steve Rogers. And I'll tell you, up there in that booth, he had no problem with that move of sending Steve Rogers out there. He was the best pitcher that Montreal had, and he was in shape to pitch that inning. So that was difficult. But 94, this was the best team in baseball, had the best record in baseball. We're getting better day by day, game by game. I think, to test my memory here, I think they won something like 22 of the last 23 games they played before the rug got pulled out from under them and all of Major League Baseball. It was just devastating. And at the same time that was going on the field, Montreal had a movement on to build a 35,000 seat retractable roof ballpark in downtown Montreal. Olympic Stadium never worked as a baseball venue. It just, they had all kinds of problems with the roof, as you know. It just, and the location was not good. They, before they turned over the shovel and started construction of Olympic Stadium, somebody said there are 250,000 people that live within walking distance of that new ballpark. Well, we found out that it's 250,000 people that are on fixed incomes and couldn't afford to go to Major League Baseball because they never really turned it around. Other than the early 80s, and a lot of people have forgotten about that, they were drawing 2 million fans a season.
You know, it's interesting, Dave, because when you talk about the Expos and losing the season in 94, and had they been able to, say, go to a World Series and just generate some excitement and get people on board for a new stadium, the parallel that I draw is the Mariners, because the Mariners had a similar situation in the mid-90s where they were kind of, they needed a new stadium, and all of a sudden all these young stars arrive, whether it's Randy Johnson and Alex Rodriguez and then Ken Griffey Jr., etc. And as a result, there's a lot of excitement as the team goes into the playoffs. They play the Yankees, and the next thing you know, they get Safeco Field, right? So I always kind of draw that parallel with Montreal and wonder what if the Expos had done well in the playoffs, got into the playoffs, they won a World Series. Does that new stadium just get built on momentum? Do you still carry that 1994 card around in your wallet with all the guys of the roster of the
I
team?
do. I do. I have a little card. It's about 2x2. I stored it in plastic. I've carried it ever since the fall of '94 because you can make an argument that the '94 team was the best team that the Expos ever had. They had some terrific players who would go on to become Hall of Famers on other teams and everything. But this team played as a team for that entire season. They were terrific together. And I almost quoting John McHale, who said, "Nobody realizes how hard it is to get to the World Series."
Mm.
And those words echoed in my head when that '94 season came to an end.
After that, it spirals downhill
Yep.
with the team eventually leaving in 2004. In 2000, you wind up doing games on the internet, I believe, because nobody even wanted the radio rights. And then you leave after that 2000 season and you go to Florida to become the play-by-play voice of the Marlins. But what was that like those last few years? Seeing all the excitement when the franchise first came to Montreal, those years with the pennant races, '94, and then to see it end the way it ended in the early 2000s.
Yeah. Frustrating. I think the thing that always stayed with me was when Charles Bronfman, who was a wonderful owner, as a matter of fact, saved the franchise for Montreal when others had backed out in 1968 when they were trying to put things together in support of an expansion team that would begin play in 1969. Charles saved that situation. But when he put the ball club up for sale in, I think it was '97, it was devastating because he was a wonderful owner, surrounded himself with terrific baseball people. And one of the things that really hurt Charles, and one of the reasons why he put that team up for sale, was because of what had happened with the player contracts and salaries. And all of a sudden, it wasn't a family game anymore. Charles treated all of his players like family. All of a sudden, it wasn't. It was all about the money. It was all about long-term, big contracts, and that turned him off of the game. I think in a way too, it turned John McHale off, and all of a sudden, the two most important people of that franchise were gone.
When you went to Florida to become the play-by-play voice of the Marlins in 2000, did it rejuvenate you?
It did, because I wasn't ready to quit, and as you probably know, I mean, I found this out years earlier. There aren't that many openings in Major League Baseball for broadcasters. The openings don't come up very often. Broadcasters that get in there and get the job done tend to stay for a long, long time. And so all of a sudden, for me, the handwriting was on the wall, and the irony of that situation was Jeffrey Loria and David Sampson had taken over the Expos, and they called me into the office one day. This was early 2000. Said, "We're not going to have a radio contract. We know what the terms of your contract are, and they call for you to get our permission to talk to any other ball clubs that you might want to go to work for." So the handwriting was on the wall for me. I said, I've got to take a situation here and make the most of it. John Henry and David Dombrowski were in Florida running that franchise, and I knew David from his Montreal day. And so I gave him a call. He said, "You have one more trip down here." He said, "Come see me when you get here." And I did. And when I left the ballpark and Miami after that series, I knew that I had the job for next year. And so I was breathing a sigh of relief because I'd tried to talk to a lot of people, and there just weren't any openings.
You get the job in Florida, and then you are part of the Marlins organization when they win that World Series. I tried to dig this up, but did you actually get the call, or were they going with a national radio broadcaster? Did you actually get to call that World Series win?
Yeah, John Shabby and I did the call. We also incorporated Len Casper and Tommy Hutton into the broadcast because, as you know, the local TV people don't work. It's the national people that work the games, and so we had a good time in that booth, and I didn't like my call of the final out. Never have liked it, and fortunately for me, the Marlins and other teams elected to use the national broadcast call for that final out of the '03 World Series, which was just fine with me. I don't think too many times in my career I was lost for words, but I was almost lost for words when that game ended.
Well, the one call that everyone remembers with you is El Presidente, El Perfecto. I mean, you nailed it there. Dennis Martinez's perfect game against the Dodgers. I know that as a play-by-play guy, personally speaking, and I've only got like 3 years of doing Canadian football, but I mean, I don't go to the stadium thinking, what am I going to say if this occurs? Maybe if there's a milestone that's maybe around the corner, maybe you kind of think of, some words that might pop into your head or some adjectives. But I think maybe as you start seeing things develop, you start to think of what your call is going to be. With El Presidente, El Perfecto, was that completely natural at the time, or did you kind of have that simmering in your brain for maybe an inning or two?
A little bit of both. I had decided if he completes this is Dennis Martinez's moment and the Expos moment. And I promised myself that I would stay out of the way. And Ken Singleton, who was my partner that day, we talked about it. We said, let's let the director tell the story if he pulls this off. So actually, when the ball was caught in center field, ending that game, Ken and I after I made the call, Ken and I took our headsets off. And we just watched all the pictures on TV, the on-field celebration and everything.
In the bottom of the ninth, 26 in a row have been retired by Dennis Martinez. One and two pitch. In the air. Center field. Grissom. El Presidente. El Perfecto.
I thought about it during the commercial break prior to the bottom of the ninth. I was thinking about what can I do here? And sometimes funny things happen. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking back to my childhood days at Jarry Park in Philly when El Producto Cigars was a big sponsor there. And so El Producto was sticking in my mind for about 10 or 15 seconds. And I said, well, there's no Producto involved in this thing, but how about Perfecto? And then I incorporated that into Dennis Martinez's nickname, and I knew that if he pulled it off, that is what I was going to say. So did I plan it? Yeah, in the commercial break right before the bottom of the inning.
2011, you win the prestigious Ford Frick Award, and you get it inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, the broadcasting wing. What did that mean to you?
I think to every Major League Baseball broadcaster, it means the world. It's the highest honor bestowed on a broadcaster. And I think all of us that have been the recipient of the Ford C. Frick Award have felt that way. There are other things, there are other halls of fame and other things that perhaps some people would rank ahead of that. But I think for the most part, every single living broadcaster still to this day that has won the Ford C. Frick Award feels that was the highest accolade of his career.
Well, you are now retired, living in Florida. I'm looking behind you and I see an awesome collection of autographed baseballs and bobbleheads. I imagine collectibles might be a bit of a hobby for you in retirement, but what's going to keep Dave Van Horne busy in retirement?
No, funny thing about that collection, I actually have more baseballs signed by broadcasters than I have signed by players, but I do have some players up there. I've answered that question quite a few times now since December when I announced that I would not accept the Marlins offer. They made me an offer to come back for 22. There was no way that I could accept the offer that they made, and I told them that. And I said, if you want to change a few things, get back to me. But I can't sign this agreement, and that's the last I've heard from them. To this day, I have not heard one word. So it came to an end that way, not the way I wanted to end my career. I'd like to have done 2 more years. I've been able to stay in pretty good health, and I still love the game, and I still love doing the games from first pitch to the final out. But it's over now, and I don't regret the move, and I didn't go out looking elsewhere, and I won't do that. It's over, and it was a pretty good career with 3 years in the minor leagues, 56 years in baseball. So this is my first summer in 57 summers that I'll have time on my hands.
Yeah, and your wife's going to find out who you are this summer as well.
Yeah, that's a danger.
Dave, this has been, honestly, like I said at the start, it's been a treat. As a kid growing up, watching you and Duke on CBC and falling in love with the Expos and baseball, and having the opportunity to do play-by-play like down the road. And like I said, I just started doing the CFL with the BC Lions like 3 years ago. But, it's funny, and I mean this as a compliment. When I took the job, I talked about the people that preceded me, the J. Paul McConnells, the Jim Coxes, the Rick Balls, etc., Scott Rintoul. And I think, to me, there's always that standard of broadcasting excellence that has to be strived for. And I think you're one of those people that, having watched you grow up, this is the way you do it. This is the way you call a game. And I think you've done that for a lot of broadcasters, whether it be in baseball or other sports. And I just, the standard that you set, I thought was amazing. And again, thank you for doing that. Thank you for providing us with all those memories and all those great calls, and best of luck in retirement.
Thank you, Rob. I really appreciate those kind words. I do want to say this. I was absolutely blessed to have the partners I had. I mentioned Russ Taylor early in the show. I got to work a full season with Don Drysdale on television. I got to work part of a season with Pee Wee Reese on television. Duke Snyder and I for over 15 years together on radio and TV. I worked 2 games at Jarry Park with Jackie Robinson in the booth beside me. How fortunate I was to have those people. And then later in my career, Ken Singleton came along, a wonderful partner, a wonderful major league broadcaster who coincidentally has also now retired. Gary Carter and I worked together for 3 seasons on. So I was blessed with good people in the booth with me, and they're responsible for a lot of what I might have been able to accomplish as a broadcaster.
Well, Dave, again, thank you so much. Enjoy your retirement, and hopefully we'll stay in touch.
Thanks for the invite.